good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody here in the webinar. It's indeed our pleasure to present our brand new version, VirtualLab Fusion 23, the first version of 23. It was after 1 year of quite tough development time, and but I think we are really happy with what we have achieved in that time. And today I will present some kind of background here, and Christian, our chief developer with his team, he will present today alone some of the new features in VirtualLab in demonstrations. So we will share the work. I do a little bit more the theoretical part and the talking part, and he then will give very nice demonstrations of what we have achieved. Now, VirtualLab Fusion 23, it's with its first version, 23.1, comes with quite some new technologies and features. It is, in our understanding, the next big milestone in the development of the VirtualLab Fusion technology. And because it is that, it is also the platform for all which will come this year. And this year you can expect quite some more innovations which will enter VirtualLab Fusion. And because of that importance of this kind of developments, we have decided to introduce the new features in the webinar series. In the Monday webinars, we start here. It's an overview. Then we have the Wednesday webinars. I come a little bit to what's there about the key technologies inside VirtualLab Fusion. And then the Thursday webinars are dedicated to discuss what we have done in the detector area. I like to go a little bit as a preview for the Wednesday webinars, a little bit into this part, because of course it's also reflected in the overview. And I like to give you a little bit about the guiding principles Christian and me are following with our teams. And the guiding principles of development of VirtualLab Fusion can be summarized as follows. One thing is very clear to us: a future-proof optics software, that means a sustainable optics software development, must be based on physical optics. That's for us a given. And that does not mean that if a physical optics is at the core of the software, like here in our virtual lab, this is not a decision against geometrical optics at all. So it's not a question, as it's sometimes understood, physical optics or geometrical optics. But the major thing, which is also reflected by the word fusion, is that physical optics include geometrical optics. And that is a fact which you can, for example, find in Saleh Tai's book on fundamentals of photonics and so on. So that's a well understood concept in optics, that geometrical optics is part of physical optics. The question is not so much that it's an academic part of it, but how to make it accessible in a software. There's another thing we also like to definitely to emphasize, and that's the reason why we call it a fast physical optics software. It's that the physical optics modeling must be fast. Otherwise, it's not practical. Even if there are a lot of advantages for physical optics, if it's not fast, then it is not of practical use very often. So that means it must be fast, and that means in a mathematical computational term that the computational effort should be linear in the number of sampling points of the fields or the functions you deal with. And then somehow to put that to the key, if it's fast, ray optics is a linear in n if you don't do Monte Carlo ray tracing, but if you do standard ray tracing, it's linear in n in the number of rays. So that means if physical optics includes geometrical optics and if it should be fast, then it's logical to search for a software which gives access to ray optical results as a subset of physical optics, with the same speed as ray tracing software. So these are our guiding principles which we follow. And I will discuss with Christian on the Wednesday, in the Wednesday webinars, much more about the theoretical background of this. And the key picture for that is that we have physical optics. In physical optics, we identify what we call point-wise modeling sequences. And these point-wise modeling sequences are exactly the key for going to ray optical results. That is but I discuss on Wednesday more. It's important already today because the pointwise modeling sequences you will also see today in our demonstrations and in some kind of discussions and features. So it means pointwise modeling in physical optics, it's a very essential part which follows from our guiding principles. And it's also the key to understand how physical optics includes geometrical optics in an accessible way. So that's very, very essential. And we also know that another hurdle, not only the speed of physical optics modeling, which we tackle by this kind of approach, but also the other hurdle is often that physical optics is understood as much more complicated than ray optics. That we could argue about that. Anyway, it's a superset, so it should be a little bit more difficult because it includes the other parts. So it's logical to assume there are more concepts included. But anyway, that does not mean that the usage of physical optics software must be more complicated. So it means in the webinar on Wednesday, we will discuss about the theoretical concept. But today we also will consider that physical optics software must be user-friendly. It's another guiding principle. And easy to use without being a physical optics expert. That's of course sure. Also, even in ray optics, not all people using ray optical software are experts in ray optics, of course. So it means that's very, very important. And this is another focus of the version 23.1. And you will see that today also in demonstrations, our new help and assistant concept, which should help the user to have an easier getting started into VirtualLab Fusion technology, and also to learn quite something about physical optics and the physical concepts which are in the background of VirtualLab working. So that is the theoretical part of our technology will be discussed on Wednesday, mainly. And then we have a very, very big step in detector development in the new version, and which we have also said that is so big that we should give that an extra webinar. And I'd like to show you the basic idea behind it already today. Now, when we are developing a software, it doesn't matter what kind of software we are doing in optics, if it's physical optics or ray optics, it's always including source modeling, component modeling, and detector modeling. That's completely clear because that are the building blocks from which the system is built. In each software version we are developing, we have a focus. Some version we are more focusing on the source modeling, some we focusing more on the component modeling, and some on the detector modeling. This time we have mainly focused on detector modeling, also source, but mainly detector modeling. And in 23, we will then tackle quite a lot of component modeling and put new features here too. That means in the new version 23.1, detector development was very important. And here comes a very, very important breakthrough, which we call the universal detector. What's the basic idea behind it? The basic idea behind it is as follows. If we do a system modeling, then we have detectors somewhere in the system. And let's assume you have one place, let's focal region of a system, and you like to measure different detector functions, like spot size, like energy flow, or whatever, irradiance, whatever you like to measure there. In the current, not current anymore, but in the old versions, so 22 and smaller, we had the following concept that each detector came as a single detector, and VirtualLab had to propagate to this detector, calculate the field, and then evaluate the detector function. This is obviously, if the detectors are all in the same plane or same position, not a very healthy approach from a computational effort point of view. So we decided to replace that by a universal detector, where we just propagate to this place, to this detector plane, one time, calculate the field one time, and then calculate all the different detector functions, if it's pulse length, or if it's coherence function, or it's irradiance, or luminance, or whatever, we can calculate then from the fields. How to do that and how this works will be discussed in detail in the first webinars. Obviously, by doing all this in the post-processing of the electromagnetic field, it becomes much, much, much faster. Okay, so that's a quite important thing. And it also means that's a major breakthrough to provide you with all detectors you might be interested in. And I think that's also very, very important. It's because it's a post-processing. It is not related to the modeling engine itself. It's a post-processing of the field data. If there is a detector missing and you contact us, okay, first you can program it yourself very easily with these add-ons. As we will discuss on Thursday, or if you don't like to do, or if you don't can, or whatever, you can contact the support at Lighttrends, and then we typically, if the detector function is well defined from a physical point of view, then we can provide the detectors quite easily, also completely independent of a release. So we can do it just as a support in between releases. We think that is definitely a big thing and helps you a lot to work with VirtualLab in the way you like to do. Now let's concentrate on the overview of the webinar today. So in the webinar today, we like to discuss with you an overview about all the features we have introduced in the version 23. The major themes we have followed in this, besides our guiding principles, was we always like to achieve higher speed because we like to do fast physical optics. So we always need to contribute something to the speed. We like to have an easier use, as I discussed. That's very important from the guiding principle also. Of course, the physical optics software is the more powerful, the more physics is included. What in our, Christian's, in my opinion, is super, super important is that we are not a black box, but that VirtualLab is completely transparent, that you know what we do and how we do it. So we have deepened the transparency of our modeling concepts and also the monitoring possibilities of the modeling. And of course, it's also very important that the user has a very good control. Control means always two things. One thing is, if you don't like to care about controlling too many parameters of the modeling, the software VirtualLab Fusion will support you in automatic approaches. But on the other hand, we don't like to forbid expert users, which have a lot of experience or some experience already in their specific system, to do a very precise control of all the parameters they are interested in. So these are always two sides of the same thing. On the one hand, for users which like to do something fast without thinking too much, concentrating on the physics, the software should do the things of the modeling. But if you like to really go into the detail, you should also have the way to control what you do in detail. So these are some kind of major themes. These are the major themes of the development. And I'd like to give you first a very brief overview about all topics, and then to go into detail of some of them a little bit more. Let's talk about higher speed. The higher speed, we always contribute to something. We have different ways to do that. We can improve our algorithms. That is what Christian and team has done. So that means the fast physical optics core technology has been further optimized. There's always something we can do, and we will continue to do that. Then we have improved the use of multi-core processors in parallel computing. You can expect something more this year about parallel computing, in particular in the context of distributed computing, cloud computing. But for this version now, it's multi-core processor parallel computing. By the profile editor and profile editing tools, the new control center tools, which you will learn more about it today, you will get a quite nice way to do a balancing of accuracy and speed. That means how many physical effects should be included versus speed. That in particular is related to what's the magnitude of diffraction effects you like to include in the modeling. That is quite an important effect on the speed. And as I already mentioned, the tunable detector is a significant step to increase the modeling speed by just saving modeling steps and time. So that is about the speed, just an overview. I'll give you some benchmark tests soon. Easier use. Yeah, you will see today we have introduced a quite comprehensive help and assistant concept. And this assistant concept is extremely dynamic. That means we can add content all the time. it's connected to the internet, and you get the content in VirtualLab Fusion at your fingertips, but we can add always content. Also, if you see some things which we like to add in explanations because some users have problems there, then we can add that in between the releases. Then you will see a lot about profile editor and the tools. This gives you, of course, a much easier way to handle the modeling. And then our data views are under steady. The data views are somehow the window of the results to you. That means VirtualLab is doing simulations, and the data views give you the results. And we are working on doing that more powerful and more unified also to help to simplify the usage of that. So you also will see that more. Then more physics. As I said already, we have always things to do in source modeling, component modeling, detector modeling, and the engine itself. So we improved the seamless transition between physical and geometrical optics and how to do that and how to control that. This will be discussed, as I mentioned, in the Wednesday webinars mainly. A big thing, in our opinion, is that we introduced and add source power management. I can say you because we did this detector modeling. We also now have radiometric detectors, and radiometric detectors and photometric detectors without a proper power management is not really nice. Maybe as a user of VirtualLab, you know, typically our input fields from the source are normalized, and then you get quite some fancy power results and field power results, field strength results. And now in the new version, you are able to say how much watt your source has, and then the things are probably scaled. I'll come to this also. Components, we have added some various new features. And of course, as I mentioned, the Juno detector is really a big step forward. And I think we have completely make possible that you will not miss a detector in the future anymore, but you will get access to the detectors quite fast. Test us on that. Okay, deeper transparency, that is mainly the assistant, and the profile editor and the profile tools. They give you a quite good overview by the parameter view. You will see that very soon in the demonstrations. And the process logging, which is shown here. The process logging, that's a window you can switch on or off to see how much you have there. This process logging we have extended because we like to give you a full transparent insight about the steps we are doing, including data transfer and data conversions, and also the time which is used per step, that you see where are the critical time if you like to optimize timing, and then you might have a chance to you go into the profile editor and to change something there or to restrict something there to optimize the time even further. But anyway, it gives you if you think for what does VirtualLab needs the time here, then you can see in the logging very, very nicely. And you also see when automatic algorithms are applied, you see why they have decided to do what. I think that is also something, transparency is for us super, super, super important. So we are not a black box. Now, better control is in fact directly related to the transparency, again, the profile editor and the profile tools. And that can be best seen in the demonstrations Christian will show soon in this webinar. So that means insight and control are two sides of the same medal, of course. So that means the editor tools and the profile editing tools are very, very essential. Now let's have a little bit of look in more details. Let's first look to the higher speed, that you get a feeling what we have achieved. It's not a new magnitude of order of magnitude, but it's quite some factors. So this here, it's a parallel microlens array modeling with our very cool microlens array component, which is modeling the dots very, very, very well. And these are a lot of channels to model. And here we have a better parallel computing. So you get some increase. You can see here from 16 to 11 seconds. That is just on one computer, can be of course different on others a little bit. This one is a wafer inspection system, which we will discuss also more in detail on the Wednesday webinar, because it's quite a nice example to show the principles. Here you see it's more than a factor of 2 to increase the speed. Here's a lot of sequences and a lot of steps, and each improvement in each step gives an advantage, of course. Coherence management measurement is another example where you use quite some wavelengths, because if you like to do a coherence measurement, then there's a temporal coherence here in this example, then you need a bandwidth here of 50 nanometers. You need to sample it with quite some sampling points. That is parallel computing. So you need to sample, you need to calculate a lot of different wavelengths through the system. And here you see factor of 2 by the improvements of parallel computing. And for pulse, it's the same. If you have a pulse, you also have a lot of wavelengths, and then you also see here that we have here also a quite nice factor. So you see these are quite nice improvements in the calculation time, and it's always amazing that Christian and his team can get that out of the software by further optimizing the algorithms and the processes. We continue this way, and there will always be place to be a step better. Big steps will come when we do distributed computing, which is on the way to come. Here's another example, which is a factor of 3 even. And this is also important because that is a gridless sampling, which is this point-wise sequences. And if you have a lot of these points, then we also improve speed, how to go through a system with a lot of points. So that means we have a factor 2 or 3 of improvements in this kind of examples, which is a quite nice result for improvements of the algorithms in their speed. Now let's come to the very big topic, help center. Let's see where we have been. We were there, that we have on the right side of your window in VirtualLab, there was a small question mark. And if you click on it, then you have some kind of context menu. It was not much more. That was this. And there was, of course, access to the manual, and then a little bit some other things. Now we have absolutely upgraded this, and we have introduced a full ribbon, help ribbon, to support. Also, the focus topics are now here. You know the focus topics from the initial window of the software, and now we have done this. There's one thing I like to emphasize, because that's also a part of our philosophy. We like to have a very, very direct communication line between you as a customer and us. That means if you have trouble to do something, if you have any kind of questions, then you can contact our mail support, our support team, headed by Dr. Steiner. And Olga, by the way, is also part of this support team. And they are doing a great job, and I think you all appreciate their work to reply fast and to try to help you. Now, to simplify or to facilitate the work of our support team, we have done the following, that if you have some issues using VirtualLab, there is a mail support information. You can first do your diagnosis, then there is a log file, which is giving all the information which is important for the support team and the technical team at Virtual Photonics, of course, Christian's team. And so that means you can send a mail to support, a direct communication, where all the information about the hard log, the version, everything from any information which is important to us, including the log file, are there if you like to use it. Okay, so that's clear. And then you just need to say what's the situation, and then the support team has a lot of information to start with and to ask more questions. We think that's very, very important, that we have this direct communication to you. There is another point, which is news. News is also now interactive in the way that we can change the content there from our side. So it means it helps us to do very important information to you about some kind of issues which turned out to be important. We can inform you there about a new detector maybe, new detectors are there, new detector add-ons are there, even between the releases, we can inform you about that, or other nice examples we have done, or whatever. So that means it also helps us to have a direct communication with you. Of course, transparent and control. You can, of course, not use this file support information if you don't like, and you also can switch off the news, of course. Anyway, so, and then I like to say that we have another thing also to support the usage of VirtualLab Fusion, that we have started more consequently to use tooltips. Tooltips, you know, of course, tooltips from other software we have now using much more consequently. I like to mention that because we are using our own software development concepts, of course, it's based on .NET Framework from Microsoft, of course, but it always depends a little bit on the levels you are there. We are using for tooltips a special tool. I just mentioned that because the behavior is a little bit untypical. So it's not there if you go there and then it goes away when you go away, but it's there for some time and then it goes away. And this time you can control in the global options. And if you put it to 0, then you don't see them at all. So again, control and transparency. So we give you the information. If you know everything already very well, then you can switch it off. And here you also see already, and Christian will show more about it, the assistant. That means we have an assistant here, which, if you like to get more information about it beyond also the manual, then you can get it there. Now, that is the assistant. The assistant has a main button in the help, but it also appears quite in different places, as you will see in the demonstration, which will come now. So now Christian takes over and shows the first demonstration. Christian?
Thank you, Frank, for the nice introduction of the Help Center. I will switch on my video also. So I hope everybody can see my VirtualLab opened. So as Frank mentioned, the assistant is a quite cool tool to support you with all the information we like to present for specific topics. So the first question which appears is, where do you find it? And this is quite easy. So the VirtualLab Assistant is presented in a docking window, in the VirtualLab main window. It's near to the property browser or VirtualLab Explorer on the right side initially, but it's also possible to move it. So you can easily use the drag and drop option if you select the assistant here and move it to somewhere else. You can also dog it on the left side or to the bottom. Or if you are working with several monitors, you can even put it on another monitor and then use it in a larger version or something like this. Okay, let's put it back first. And the first thing I like to show you here is the start page of the VirtualLab Assistant. Here we have a list of categories which can be collapsed or uncollapsed, and where you can find different sub entries here. And it's quite easy to move through this stuff. It's also quite known from other tools like PowerPoint or something like this. Then you can click, for example, on, let's select the introduction to the assistant entry, and then you get here some information. And this information is typically organized in the following way. So we have first some general introduction where you explain some general aspects of a feature or of a tool. Then we have also some usage recommendation. Typically, we also come up with some look and feel videos, which are typically generated by me. So this is, of course, always under current developments, and we will steadily add new content there. We will also give some technical insights here, also in video format. And another very important thing is you can also navigate through these pages, of course. So it's a little bit like a web browser inside VirtualLab. So by using the buttons at the bottom of the VirtualLab Assistant, for example, you can go backward and forward. Or you can go to the home page, which is the topics of the VirtualLab Fusion Assistant page I showed initially. And there's also a button which can be used to open the assistant entries in your own browser, if you like to use it in this way. So now the next question, how to access, not where the assistant is located, but how to access and jump into the assistant. First option is, of course, that you can use directly the assistant and navigate through it. Another option, as Frank already mentioned, is to access the assistant via the help ribbon and clicking on the assistant button. Here, for example, currently no VirtualLab window is open, which leads to the assistant entries to the introduction to the assistant. Let's open some sample file. So now an optical setup in VirtualLab is open. I selected simply something, doesn't matter. And if I click now here on help assistant, then I get some information to the optical setup, which is quite some context sensitive information. And so you are guided in the best way. So I can also do a short simulation of it. For example, now I have a data array opened. And if I click now on help assistant, then I get information on data arrays. As you can see, here is a look and feel video, which I produced. And you can get further information if you study the content of the assistant here. Okay, this is a second option. A third option, Frank already mentioned, are the tooltips, especially in the optical setup, profile, editing, and run ribbon. We added a lot of tooltips, for example, to the modeling profiles, which I show later also. There you simply can go over the buttons here and then check, for example, here the assistant entry, and you get directly some information regarding the topic you were selecting. Okay, the last but not least information I like to give you on the how to access the profile editor, the VirtualLab assistant is on specific dialogues. Let's have a look at the profile editor. I will say something also to the profile editor later. And there we have, for example, a button at the bottom left side on this dialog. And if I click here now, I get the assistant opened in an extra window. I'm now here on the parameter overview page. So the content which is displayed in the assistant is a parameter overview. If I change now here to, let's say, power management, for example, the dialog closes again. And if I click here on the assistant button, I get the information on the source power management. So this is quite powerful because you always get information on the topic you are currently investigating. If I close now the dialog, then the entry automatically moves to the right side and I can proceed further reading the content and studying the content on the topic I had a look, the last one. Okay, at the end of the demonstration, I like to have a further look on the help buttons or on the help ribbon. As Frank mentioned, we have in the help ribbon, which can be accessed here next to the Windows ribbon. We have some entries to the user manual. We have this assistant button I showed before. We have also this focus topic files, which are now read dynamically from the internet. So we can easily change also which sample files we like to provide you here. And last but not least, we have this communication center, for example, where I can see the latest news. Currently, there is only one news which is currently there, which is the Welcome to VirtualLab Fusion 2023.1 button. And if I click here, then I get this news displayed also in the assistant page, which can be quite helpful if we like to give you some information for some specific features, which makes the communication between you and us quite dynamic. So that's Frank. You can take over again.
Okay. So, yeah, thank you very much. That was very nice. And I'd like to say, give us some time. This assistant will be, we will add content to this assistant all the time. We have started with, Christian have mainly pushed with some look and feel movies, which we think are very, very important because the look and feel movies gives you a very first impression how to work with the tool. I will definitely add quite some theoretical background that you learn also about some physics about, physics about it. And so that means the assistant will grow gradually. Also, our support team will add, of course, information if they have about some features, about typical issues users have, and so on. So that's a very dynamic project. It's a new project. The assistant is a new project which will become more and more interactive when you use the software. So it's a very, very big thing for us in the development. Now, let's come to the modeling profiles. The modeling profiles, we introduced these modeling profiles as a new part of the optical system files. You know, if you use VirtualLab, the system is defined in an OS file. And that is in the optical system and the editor of the optical system. So it is defined there. And with all the parameters you have there, and now we have given the modeling itself profiles. In the first version now, we have add 2 profiles which can be stored with the system, and you can configure them, and then the system can be modeled in 2 ways which are stored in the modeling profiles which the system comes with. And in this version, we have add what we call a general profile. And so here, a general profile and a ray results profile. You will not find any more ray tracing button, because we finally have decided that we, as a physical optics software, which follow the logic of ray optics is part of physical optics, that we should do all of that about our physical optics engine, because it has the same speed in the case of producing ray optical results. So you will not feel any difference there in your user experience, besides maybe sometimes it's faster, as I have shown before, but otherwise not. But we have now reflected very, very clearly that ray optical results are produced with a physical optics engine. And this is reflecting now, and I will discuss that much more in the Wednesday webinars. This is now reflected very, very clearly in this part. So it means this ray results and this general profile is reflecting exactly our understanding of physical optics. General profile can tackle everything in physical optics. Integral operations, pointwise operations, and it can also handle the production of results for ray optics. But because our users are, of course, often interested to ray results they know from ray optics first, we have add this ray results profile, which is already pre-configured in a way that the ray results are given. Christian will show that very soon in demonstrations. So it means this philosophy we will discuss in Wednesday webinars more. It's reflected by these profiles. So it means the profiles are the center where you can control the level of physical optics modeling, including a seamless transition into producing ray optical results. That has drastically been improved in the way that you can do it very gradually now, and that will be shown also now. So yeah, that's already again what I have to say to this, and I think Christian now takes over to do this demonstration.
So let's have a look how to work with modeling profiles in VirtualLab. For this purpose, I decided to build up an optical setup together with you. So let's do it right from the scratch on. So I generate a new optical setup, and I like to have a setup where I use a plane wave which illuminates a spherical lens, which should have roughly a focal length of 20 millimeters. So the first thing I add now is my plane wave. Then I add a spherical lens. I can easily search for it. Then I don't have to go into the depth of the tree, and I like to add a universal detector. The plane wave I keep initially as it is, given by default values. And now let's have a look on the parameters of the spherical lens. Therefore, we can use a spherical lens calculator, which is also provided by VirtualLab, where you can enter some parameters, and this calculator uses the lens maker equation to calculate the geometry parameters of the lens. And therefore, I first change the thickness of the lens that I like to have 10 millimeters, and I like to set the back focal length to be 20 millimeters. Please have a look at the second surface. So my lens, what I selected here, I like to have a plan convex lens. So the free parameter which can be adapted by the calculator is now the radius of curvature of the second surface. If I press OK, you see the parameter of the lens of the second lens surface is changed. Then I go to the spherical lens component in the edit dialog, and I say I like to copy the parameters from the calculator to the lens editor. Once again, have a look on the parameters which are displayed here. I press the button. I need to select the calculator. I press OK. Now the parameters of this calculator are transferred to my lens component. I close this dialog by clicking OK. And finally, I set the distance of the detector to be 20 millimeters. Now my system is initially configured for further discussions. So let's minimize the calculator once more. And here we already see the selection of the different profiles. Let's start with the simulation using the ray result profile. Therefore, we simply select it. And here we can also select the result visualization type. So initially, I like to have a system 3D visualization. And I simply perform the simulation by pressing on Go. Now, quite nicely, a 3D view is generated where you can see, here is my plane wave. I did not define any distance between the plane wave and the lens, so the lens is directly after the source. Then the light propagates through the lens, and here we are in the focal region. In addition, I have another result visualization type I can use in the ray result profile. This is called detectors. I simply activate it, and if I press here now, again go, or go here, I get this dot diagrams which people might typically know from classical ray tracing software. Because of this fact that I have here more or less a rotation symmetric problem, I also like to adapt the sampling of my ray samples or of my field samples I like to use for simulation. And therefore, I go here to do it once more a little bit slower. I click here on this small wheel and change here the sampling point selection to be hexapolar. And let's say I like to use a density of 7. I repeat the simulation once more, and then I get this kind of distribution, which is simply another initial selection of sampling points in my start plane. So let's now go to the general profile. In the general profile, my universal detector is defined to calculate or to provide not the griddless information in the detector plane, but to provide the interpolated version of it. I can simply change the profile, select here all the detectors, and press on Go. And then I get something like this. And then, of course, most people will ask, what is this? Because we are in the focal region, so typically you would expect some airy pattern or something like this. And this comes from a quite, let's say, obvious configuration. In our current modeling, everything is set to pointwise. So there is no integral operation included, which will be discussed later in the webinar on Wednesday. So we can easily change the propagation to the detector to be automatic propagation selection. So the Fourier transform algorithms will be selected automatically. I perform now the simulation once more. And as you can see, I get here very nicely a nice array pattern. And also interpolate it and show it in another color lookup table, for example. I get also here access to the EX component and to the EY component. One could see here the EX component is in kilovolt per meter given. The EY component is quite small because we are initially linear polarized in X, but we have some small crosstalk effect which comes from the lens itself. So for further demonstration, I like to deactivate the EY component because this is not necessary to discuss further because it's quite small. And I also like to change the color of the default color or the initial color of the view to be dark side. So let's perform the simulation once more. Then you see it's now only one subset of information. which is the EX component, and I can see here the amplitude in the new color. So the next thing I like to show you now is, I like to increase the size of the plane wave. So initially the size was 1 millimeter by 1 millimeter or a little bit more. And I like to put it now to 5 millimeter by 5 millimeter. So let's say I increase by that the NA of the system. Then I go back to the ray result profile and check first the 3D system visualization. Okay, as we expected, we see now that the size of the plane wave is, of course, much smaller. And we also see that we have some additional aberrations, which comes from the fact that we are using here a spherical wave. And of course, with the spherical wave, we cannot achieve a aberration-free focus. We can also check, of course, here the detector result, so the dot diagram for the ray result profile. You would see if we compare directly, it is now much bigger. And we can also easily change to the general profile to calculate the field distribution here. As you can see, it is maybe a little bit too big and the sampling is not adapted quite well. So let's go back to the detector and configure the size of the detector in a manual way. So we set it here to 200 micrometers, for example. Repeat the simulation, and then we get something like this. The question is now, is this the focus of the system? I would say no, but let's have a look with VirtualLab, what VirtualLab says. And therefore we have another tool, which I also like to include in this short presentation, which is a fine focus position tool. And if I perform now this tool, you see this tool automatically adapts the Z position of the detector plane. We can check once more the 3D system visualization. Okay, it's an aberrated focus, so of course it's a question where the focus really is. We can also check the dot diagram in this new detected focal plane. What is of course here the case is now that it's much smaller than before. And finally, I also like to make a simulation of the general profile once more to see now a nice focal region evaluated by the general profile, where you see some crazy spherical aberrations. I think it is quite amazing how easy it is to do such simulations, and as you could see, the user has not to take care of any of the settings because everything is done automatically. Okay. What I also like to show you in advance is I like to change now the orientation of the detector. Therefore, I change, for example, the rotation of the detector to be tilted by 50 degrees around alpha. Let's have a look what this means in the 3D view. So let's have here a look in this plane. So before I was in this plane, now I tilted the detector by 50 degrees. Okay, of course, the dot diagram I could also investigate, but let's go directly to the result of the general profile. And there you see now also very nicely that also this kind of, let's say, some already quite complicated configuration is possible in a quite easy way. And it's also quite performant, I would say. Okay, the last thing I like to do here only for demonstration purpose is I like to rotate back the lens, the detector, to be again perpendicular to the optical axis. And I like to introduce a shift of the lens. And the lens I shift now in a, let's say, isolated way, which means I only like to shift the lens and not the detector. Therefore, I go in the edit dialog of the spherical lens. I go to position and orientation. I go on the isolated positioning page, and I activate here that I like to use isolated translation. And I change the X position to be shifted by 1 millimeter. Once again, let's do first the three-dimensional system evaluation. And then you see already quite nicely that we are not illuminating the lens on axis, but slightly shifted. And of course, by this, we get some really crazy aberration, I would say. Let's do also for this, the detector evaluation. And then we see, okay, this is somehow weird. And this comes from our previous configuration of the detector size. That's the reason why I simply increase the size a little bit to 400 by 200 micrometers. No, 300 micrometers. Perform the simulation again. And now you see is a complete field. So you see you have quite some focal situation here and some additional aberrations which come simply from the shift of the lens. What I like finally to do now is to perform the same simulation with the general profile to get the PSF distribution in this plane for this configuration, which is also generated quite fast. And as you can see, we get nicely in a very fast way the result calculated by the general profile. And please keep this result in mind because I like to use it for some later demonstration. Okay, this was quite a heavy trip with a lot of different experiments. I would also say that even such kind of experiment could be discussed in a complete webinar. But for introducing the modeling profiles and how you can easily switch between them, I think this should be enough. And I'd like to give back the word to Frank.
Yeah, thank you. I like to, of course, to emphasize it shows what you have shown is mainly again how easily we can use the two profiles. It has not shown that the results you obtain by the ray optics profile, the ray optical result profile, can also be obtained by the general profile. So you can do a smooth, seamless transition from the general profile configuration to the ray. The ray profile is a specific pre-configured general profile. We will discuss that more in the Wednesday webinars. Good. So the editor, Christian, has not opened yet. The editor is exactly where you can configure all these things. Christian now used in the demonstration, he used the dialog of the detector itself and just the tool to change the pointwise to automatic propagation in the propagation to the detector. But the profile editor gives a full overview about all the parameters you can handle, and there you can exactly control it. So that means this editor gathers all parameters, also the parameter overview you already know. So it gathers all parameters and gives you really a central place where you have access to all parameters in a very, very cool way. And that's already back to Christian. We could also skip this here and you can take over directly, I would say here.
I agree. Okay, then back to me. Okay, Frank already introduced in a very nice way. So the profile editor is a location where we collect all the parameters of your optical system. Maybe one of the most important things I like to mention at the beginning. It is an optional, or it is a new option to configure these parameters. So all the old options are still available, which you saw in my last demonstration. For example, you can still use the edit dialogs of the components if you like to, or you can also use the parameter overview tree, which is provided if you have activated an optical setup, or you can also use the parameter overview, which is an extra document or extra dialog, which appears if you click on the corresponding ribbon entry. The profile editor can be accessed by clicking on the profile editor button in the profile editing and run ribbon of an optical setup. And here we organize information, complete information of the optical setup in a quite smart and organized way. So on the left side, you see different categories. So on the top, we have an entry for sources, Then comes something about components and solvers. We have also a section for visualization and detectors, and finally there is a section on other settings, which are settings more on system level, like the system temperature and such things. And you can easily switch between these categories by clicking on the corresponding button on the left side. If you select the category, you can also easily see that we have typically some subcategories provided here. So for example, for sources, we have the parameter overview. We have a tab which provides the information of the position and the size of the source. If you are using, for example, the multiple source, then each entry in the multiple source is listed here. If you also a tab for power management, which will be discussed in our webinar on Thursday. And this proceeds also for components, detectors, and also some system settings. But next to the nice structure, there are also some, let's say, common user interfaces which are widely used. One example is the parameter overview table, which you know from the parameter overview tool. This is a very nice user interface which can be used to configure numerical parameters of your configuration. We have the parameter overview available for sources, for detector, for components, and also for the detectors. And it's organized in the following way. So typically you have here a column for the object, which is in our case now our source. We have optionally some categories, and then we have a list of parameters and its values. And you can easily change the values inside this table by clicking here in the last cell or in the last cell in the last column and switch. For example, in this case, it's a Gaussian source, and I can change easily the order to be, for example, 1 in X direction, and then it's automatically transferred to the light source. And in addition, we also offer the access to the edit dialog from this command control by double clicking on the object column. The dialog appears, and here you already see the 1 which I entered here in the order X cell is transferred automatically here to this entry in this dialog. And let's check whether it's working also vice versa. Then we add here, for example, a 5, click OK, and then you see here a 5. As I mentioned, this kind of overview tables is good to get an overview for all numerical parameters, but of course you have also some other parameters like Boolean flags and so on, which can be not accessed in this format. And therefore we developed some other really nice UI technology, which I like to demonstrate to you via the free space propagation and Fourier transformation settings. I will not go into the details of these parameters, but only show how to configure them and what are the options for the common controls. So what we have here is also the parameters shown in some table format. So if I scroll here, I see for all the 3 components which are in my system now, the parameters for this section. And I can easily switch between 2 view modi, which is the table layout, and the other one is the tree view layout. If I go to the tree view layout, I can easily click also through the components in this tree view, and also have a very nice overview of the parameters. Let's go back to the table layout, and I like to show you really something which is quite awesome because I say this because I also know what is behind this. This is the filter function, because this is now a user interface which is dynamically generated. So if I search, for example, now for the string FFT, then I see here very nicely that the UI is adapted automatically, and only the things or the parameters which fit to the search string are shown in the table. Of course, you can change the parameter here as you are familiar with all the other standard UIs in VirtualLab. So this is quite a helpful and user-friendly tool to configure such kind of parameters. Okay, the last thing I like to mention as a common control in this section is the so-called MCI configuration. MCI stands for master, client, and individual. Therefore, I search once more for FFT to show you how this could be used. So let's assume for this parameter configuration, or for this set of parameter, I select that the lens number 1 should be the master. Then I can select, for example, for the lens number 2, it should be the client, which means I cannot configure this parameter anymore for the client because they are automatically overtaken from the master. So if I change here something, it is automatically transferred to this. So this is, let's say, a special version of a parameter coupling, which is quite important at this stage, I would say, because of course you could do it also with a parameter coupling, which is, let's say, more general. But for the free space propagation parameters and also for other parameters, we will do this inbuilt parameter coupling. This is quite helpful. Last sentence to this, if you put it to individual, the effect of the other settings will have no effect on the settings of the individual configuration. So if I change here something, the client is adapted, but the individual configuration you can specify as you like and independent of the other configurations. Okay, so far to the let's say general UI concepts of the profile editor. Of course, with the assistant I showed before, you can get more and more information on the specific entries in the profile editor, to which I here didn't say anything. This was only a demonstration which tackles, let's say, the general options and configuration and structure of this profile editor. Back to Frank.
Yeah, very nice. And also here, I like to say this profile editor, that's the first version we have now. For example, the MCI concept is not everywhere in the editor available, but we will add it in particular to detectors, because for detectors, for example, if you like to have detectors all with the same window size or something like this, or with the other same settings in the configuration, then it is very helpful to handle all detectors at the same time. So it means you see at this example, we spend quite some time and effort to do things user-friendly, because that's one of our guiding principles in the development. Then, as Christian demonstrated very nicely, the editor is, if you change something in the editor, it is transferred to the system. And we can also do it by tools. It means we can also transfer information to the system settings, to the profile, which is stored in the system by tools. So it means one thing is the editor where you have access to everything, or for fast access, we have tools. So these tools are fast access, maybe specialized tools to configure something in the profile which is of basic interest. We started a little bit this thinking in the version 2020.1 with this modeling levels 1, 2, 3. And I like to say we had a version even in between where we have extended this to more numbers. Before we then said, no, that's not the right way to do. We need to have a transparent way where the physics is well communicated, not just 1, 2, 3, but the physics must be in the center. So that means in the new version now, which was reflected here, and as we will discuss in the Wednesday webinars, most important for us is the switching between integral and pointwise operation. That is a major key of the technology. And we have mainly propagation from sources to components and between components, inside components, for example, inside the lens system, and propagation to detectors. And all of this can be handled pointwise or automatic. This is done here in this kind of tool. So it means the tools are mainly about, currently the tools are mainly about helping to set the Fourier transforms that people don't need to care about the Fourier transforms. If they don't like. If they like, they can. If they don't like, they can concentrate on the physics. This is what we will discuss in detail on Wednesday. I really will give very much theoretical insight. What does it mean and why do we do that in this way and so on? So that means that is this webinar here. And here's just another tool which gives full access to all the propagation in the system about individual settings of the different categories of propagations. And there's one microphone on, I just like to say, I hear it. And then we can do all pointwise or all automatic or all integral. And that is to be discussed dependent on how much diffraction effects you like to include. I can already say here, if you do all in a pointwise way, then diffraction is neglected in the modeling completely, independent on the real magnitude of diffraction. If you use integral operations everywhere in the propagation between the components and the source and detectors, then diffraction is always included, independent again of the magnitude of diffraction. And the automatic selection or any kind of selection you do in your specific settings you like to do yourself, but the automatic selection is doing the following. It is doing a threshold that diffraction is included dependent on the magnitude of the diffraction. That means VirtualLab is estimating that, and if diffraction is below a threshold, then it is switching to a pointwise algorithm where the diffraction is neglected at the advantage of a pointwise, and by that, in particular, fast algorithm. So, but this will be discussed more. And this is just one tool. And if you change something here, then if you would go back into the profile editor, you would see all the Fourier transform settings in a way accordingly to this kind of tool settings. Okay, so that's very important. By the way, if you change something here, then it's also changed here in the visualization. So we have not only the concept, or we not only have started the concept of tools which are helping as a shortcut to set something in the profile editor or in the profile itself, but we also have a monitoring system started to develop. It means that you see what are the current settings. Because if you change something here, it's not already set. If it's set, if you apply it, or if you said okay. And if you do that, then you will see that it changed here also, for example. Anyway, so that means it's also visualized what you do. That's even more done in another tool, which is a tool to control paraxial assumptions. You know, if you do physical optics, the books are full of paraxial assumptions. There's almost no physical optics discussion in teaching books, which is going beyond paraxial optics. Vectorial optics, which is, if you go to non-paraxial optics, of course, it's vectorial. It's not too much discussed, which is a pity, but doesn't matter for us. Anyway, paraxial assumptions are anyway interesting in some way. And here we have another tool, which is a tool first that we assume that if something is very paraxial, then diffraction effects are evolving very slowly. Assume you have a truncated collimated plane wave, or plane wave which is truncated, then the diffraction is at the boundaries only and developing very, very slowly. And maybe you are not interested in it because you are interested in interference, for example, or so. Then you can switch it off. Then you can say, okay, I know here diffraction is there and it's not below any threshold in the sense of the pointwise considerations, but I anyway don't like to consider it. So then you can switch it off. So that is some tool here. And here it's, if you change something here and you apply it, then you see the change here in the settings and you see also what the actual settings are before you do that. There's another thing in paraxial assumptions, which is the field calculation. You know, physical optics, we deal with 6 field components, but we are typically handling EX and EY independently, and the other 4 components are calculated from EX and EY. And if you need it, for example, for Poynting vector calculation or so, for irradiance calculations and so on, you need all 6 field components. But if you have a paraxial light, then the EZ and the HZ are very, very small, so you can neglect them. That is the reason why some textbooks still say the electromagnetic fields are transversal. That means there is no Z component, which is of course nonsense, which is just true for paraxial light in assumption, in approximation. But in general, you have an EZ component, but you can now say that you don't like to consider it. And then we also know that the EX and EY and the HX and HY are very directly connected. So we can accelerate the calculation of the electronic field components quite significantly because they are directly related from EX and EY, and we don't need to do any additional Fourier transform. In general, you need 4 more Fourier transforms to calculate the full field, which is done if it's needed. But if you know already, you have a Parexel output, then you can select it here to make things again faster. So that is the Parexel thing. And then we have another tool which also helps you to do the settings. In fact, you don't need to go too much into the settings of the Fourier transform and so on. And numerical settings, you can do it by these tools. This is some balancing of speed and accuracy. You can control the sampling accuracy here. We always assume that you can say, okay, if the Fourier transforms becomes too heavy, then replace the FFT or the SFT algorithm we have by a pointwise Fourier transform algorithm. That is an approximation, but at least you can do it. It doesn't mean so many numerical efforts. So without getting a result, it's better to get a result. So then even if you know it's maybe not completely perfect, then you can do this and so on. So here's again the Parexel assumption, and here also some kind of limitations. That means if the automatic sampling is too sensible, sometimes it happens that the automatic selection requires a too high sampling, then you can limit it and to say, okay, my experience is that I don't need more for my system than this. You can also do that. So it means we have another tool. You can be sure in 2023 and the coming years, we will add quite some tools and do this more and more sophisticated, that the usage of all these different configurations in physical optics can be done in a very, very nice way. Just a fast ride through the new features of components we have done. It was not the focus in this release. It will be definitely more about that in the coming releases this year. Anyway, we have some kind of important additions. We have added something to the absorption description for the media, for the material data. We have done one important thing, which is we should have done quite some time ago, but now finally we have done it. If you use the thin element approximation for any kind of microstructure, the sampling of the microstructure field is always an issue. If you do it in an automatic sampling, it can be sometimes a little bit an issue, becomes too heavy. Typically, you know it if you have the microstructures have a pixel size. If you take a pixel size of, let's say, 10 micrometer, then it's probably good to sample each pixel at least one time. And then you have this, for example, or you do it smaller. So it gives you a more direct control, which also, again, is more transparent and also can accelerate the modeling. Then there's one technique which is very, very important in physical optics. We don't talk too much about it, but it's in fact essential. If you have apertures in physical optics, you need to sample them. You need to sample a threshold function, a Heaviside function, but they cannot be sampled because it's an abrupt jump, cannot be sampled. So what we are doing is we are introducing a smooth surface, a smooth edge. That's also important, for example, if you have a circle on a pixelated grid, on a rectangular grid, you also cannot really have a nice boundary. There's some zigzag in it. It can also be handled by this kind of approach. So what we are doing is we approach this with a soft edge that can be done very, very small. The smaller you do it, the more sampling you need, because the edge must be sampled at least with 2 sampling points, the width, the cosine part, what we are doing there, and you need 2 sampling points. So it means if you do an edge of 1 micrometer, then the sampling is already fixed to 500 nanometers in an IQ sampling. Anyway, that's very, very important. We do that in apertures regularly in VirtualLab. But if you like to have a very general apertures, like here as an example, then here you define a region by our region concept, which also becomes more prominent in future. We have a region concept. You define a region where you do some, maybe it's an aperture, maybe it's a region where you put a grating in, for example, for a light guide via AR device. Anyway, so it means you have a region, and this region now has a sharp edge, And then we add now a soft edge, so that means that it's well possible to do a reasonable modeling in physical optics. Then we add another surface, a polynomial pyramid surface, also defined on a region, important for some kind of grating structures and other kind of nanostructures. Then a lot of customers ask us for this, and we do it, of course, is that we have added a medium for smooth edges to model tolerancing in gratings, for slanted gratings in particular. Here for others, we already could do that, but now also for slanted gratings, we have added smooth edges. And also for all the gratings applications, we have added some kind of additional shift and rotation of media for volume gratings or any kind of medium, pillar gratings, meta surfaces, anything you like to talk about it. And also because of the big interest in volume gratings, we also add some kind of more sophisticated configurations for volume gratings in different applications. So these are small but quite valuable additions. We also added to keep pace with the changes of the company surrounding of ZMAX, you also need to add some kind of different file names and so on. So we also did this because it's of course clear for lens systems, it's quite good to have an import for this kind of lens files. And then our parameter one, very important concept, and our optimization document also get new access to parameters for running, changing, or for optimization. And here are some kind of these parameters, which turned out to be of interest to people to be included in the tolerancing parameter one and optimization. Good. Now to detectors, because that is a major topic on the Thursday webinars. I don't need to talk too much about it, but at least to give at least here some kind of idea. It looks like the following. You have a universal detector. The universal detector is calculating the field quantities. Then you have add-ons. And these add-ons are just added. For example, electromagnetic field quantity, that's normal. That's a starting point. You have electromagnetic fields. Then you can calculate the Poynting vector. The Poynting vector is a basis to calculate the intensity. The Poynting vector is a basis to calculate the irradiance. The illuminance is calculated from the irradiance, the radiant energy, and so on. We have added a lot of them, and we will add a lot of them. I have a full catalog on my desk of developing the physics of all these detectors, and Christian now with his team then will implement them fast. So we will add them, and the cool thing is, as soon as it's added in our team, then we can put it to the website, and then you can just load it. You can just fresh it, and then it's already there. So there's no new release needed, nothing. It is just refreshed, and you get it, all the stuff we do, and we already come with quite some. So in this version, we come with quite some, and we have a lateral extent measurement. So we have a lateral extent measurement with full width X maximum for any kind of measure. That means if it's amplitude of Gaussian, or if it's irradiance or luminance, doesn't matter. It can be applied to any kind of detector signal, because lateral extent is interesting for a lot of things. Then it's extend by a standard deviation and extend by the sum square percentage. So these are three measurements which you can add to any quantity you detect. And then you are super flexible to doing this. Then we have finally added or started, and we have already know a lot of radiometry. So intensity radiance, full energy flux. That is, of course, related to the power management in the sources. So if you put a watt in, you like to see how much comes out. Now you can. All the efficiency can be calculated. You can calculate the efficiency in a solid angle. You can calculate its efficiency through a surface part. Here, for example, the flux in the solid angle or in the surface. We have, of course, the radial intensity. We have the system efficiency. It can be calculated in different ways. This is just an option because we use it for this flux into parts. So we have different ways to calculate them. It means you can do all these things, and we will add regularly more of this. We also will come with colorimetry, etc., etc., etc. All these things, temperature, color temperature. But first we did the photometry. That means all the quantities in the radiometry, they have some kind of corresponding value in the photometry. We'll add that. And we also add something for the waveguides. It's also an add-on, by the way, that the regions, for example, on the waveguide, you have grating regions. Now, these grating regions can be displayed inside the outputs that you see where the light is and where the regions are. So you get a better orientation of the landscape of your layout related to your detector output. This is just the starting here. We are now with this revolution in the detector technology. We can add very, very fast, very, very many things. And very, very important, we really ask you, if you miss a detector, send us an email, and then we really will do it as fast as possible to provide you with anything which is missing or to help you to find it when it's already there. Good. Then we also develop more of the other detectors. We improved the multimode fiber coupling fusion detector by more features about the different medias which are there and an easier usage. We add a new analyzer for ellipsometry analyzer. We found that some of our customers are really very much interested to do simulations and compare them with their measurements. And so we add an ellipsometry analyzer to VirtualLab, which can be applied to any kind of surfaces, of course. And then it's also interesting in quite some kind of situations, we have this field insight analyzer for our Fourier modal method. And typically, we had always, up to now, we always had that the forward and the backward propagated fields are combined. That was also always the reason for this kind of interference patterns here. But now we also allow to separate them, that we just see the forward one and the backward propagated one. And that is quite illustrative to see better what are the effects in a grating structure, in a nanostructure, in a metasurface, to see better what's really going on there, why we have what kind of situation. It's better to separate the two fields and because you are mainly interested in the forward one or in the backward propagated one, but not in both together in your application in the interference. And then, of course, the power management. I already mentioned that, so I don't need to say too much about it, which is very, very essential in the detector area because it's the scaling of the detector results, right? So now you can say in the power management in the editor, that's just in the editor, in the profile editor, you can say what is the power of your source, and then we calculate the real power of the source, and then scale all the amplitudes of the fields so that everything comes well to the end of the system modeling in the detectors. I'd just like to mention here something, which is the type of power spectrum. You know, sometimes you have a discrete power spectrum. That means, for example, you have an RGB source. Then you may assume you have just 3 wavelengths. Then an integration in the detectors for photometry, for example, is not a smart idea. Then you just need to do a sum. Whereas when the power spectrum is sampled, a continuous one like the sunlight, which we have, or black body radiation, or whatever measured data you have, and you assume it's a continuous one, then you need to click here continuous, because then we use trapezoidal rules for integration over the wavelength. For example, for the photometry detectors, where you integrate over the wavelengths with the weight functions of photometry. So that's also important that we made this distinction here, which is also new, that we have very well-defined discrete wavelength distributions and sampled continuous wavelength distributions. These are all small things, but they are very, very important, and they are small here, but sometimes this kind of implementation is quite heavy, and Christian always knows about what I'm speaking. He knows even better than me, of course, because he is doing it with his team. Now, we come to the final point of this webinar presentation here. These are data views. Data views is a super powerful concept, of course. And we have a very, very, very clear concept. Detectors in VirtualLab, that's a physical meaning. Other software packages do it differently. A detector for us has a physical meaning. A detector is related to a specific quantity. For example, irradiance, luminance, pulse length, power. That's a detector. The quantity which is shown by a detector, if it's just a number, then we have a detector window for that. And If it's a quantity like a 2D, if it's a 3D distribution, we show the 3D system view. If it's some data array, then we show it in a data array view. So we have different views which can be gridless. And here you see, for example, that is just a dot diagram. Here you see also gridless, point-wise, but with amplitude values. That is what you can do with the general profile. This is just the array profile. The general profile can do it all. It can also do this, but that is just gridless. Here, now, it's the last step was a Fourier transform to go into the focal plane. So it's not gridless, so it's interpolated, nice, little bit aberrated array pattern here, and so on. So here another one, you have also, if you have different wavelengths or different modes, then you have a set of data arrays. They are gridded in this example, and you can do one diffuse, and you can see then something here. So these are views, and then we have up to now it was called color view or something like this, but what it is really, it's colorimetry. So it means you use radiometric data like intensity or irradiance, and you calculate from this via the rules of colorimetry, you calculate the color, the human perception color view, and that is what we can do in the radiometric data view, which is showing in false color or in real color. Real color means a human perception color. Okay, so a few comments. Christian will now show a demonstration of our 3D view, which is of course something we have also, because that is a mapping. I will discuss that in much more detail on Wednesday, how physical optics can produce this kind of pictures. But here we also did quite some nice improvements. And I think Christian now takes over to show a little bit about this 3D system view.
Absolutely. Thanks, Frank. So for demonstration something about this 3D view, I selected a simple collimation lens system, and I perform once more the ray result profile with the visualization configuration system 3D view, and then I get the well-known three-dimensional result visualization. The first thing I like to mention at this point, we have several general tools here, for example, like the view cube, where we can change the orientation, for example, of our lens system. We have also this toolbar at the top, where we can change between different view modes. I think there's also some new view modes available in the new version. So, for example, we have some magnification classes which are available there. We have also a ruler on the bottom right side and general coordinate system. And in the configuration of the 3D view can be done via different ways. So again, we have a view rib for the 3D view. You can change, for example, the value visualization, so the ray thickness. You can also change the orientation by some pre-configured orientations. Another option is that you use the property browser to configure all of this. And what's really new in this 2023 version is we have, let's say, re-implemented and restructured the configuration dialog of the view settings. This can be accessed also via the corresponding button in the ribbon, or via the context menu, via view settings. And we organize the information also in a quite well structured. So on the left side, you see a list of parameter groups. So we have a parameter group for color scheme. You can configure the coloring of the background and of the interfaces or of the surfaces. We have some category for the geometry stuff. We can, for example, specify the color of the envelopes and whether they should be transparent. There's a category for geometry markers, like the coordinate system, the labels, and the origin, which can be customized. Also, the dialog offers in the perspective section some pre-selected camera orientations. And the last two sections, which is rays, where you can configure whether you like to see some rays, whether you like to see the rays which are stored in the 3D view and how they should be visualized. So the color, the ray thickness, and some stripe. And in the last section, you see also some let's say options, whether you like to see the tools which I mentioned at the beginning. So let's do some adaptations. So for example, we change in the color scheme, we change the background to be bright. We like to have some colored surfaces. We like to have the envelopes to be shown, but maybe they should be shown in red. And with a higher transparency value, maybe of 80%. Maybe in the geometry marker section, I select I don't like to see labels and coordinate systems and so on. And maybe one important thing, which I'm not sure who is really aware of this, is you can also configure the ruler. For example, that it's a full-size ruler. And if I press OK, then all the view settings are then transferred to the view. And I can check whether everything fits well. What is also possible, which is maybe also quite nice from a workflow point of view, before you do these simulations, you can configure most of the parameters also in the 3D view settings in the same way as you do via the context menu or via the ribbon here. And then if you perform the simulation, then with this pre-configured configuration, then the view parameters will be adapted automatically. Okay, as I mentioned, most of the parameters are also available in the property browser. What I like to show you at the end is something really nice. And this is, I like to repeat now the simulation. And then you remember the picture we get at the beginning. And now with the copy view settings button, it's easy to transfer the view settings from this document to this document. I simply activate now this view. I click here on copy view settings, select the other one, press OK, and then everything is transferred. So there are, of course, depending on the configuration and on the details you like to discover, a lot of parameters which can be adapted. But this demonstration should give a rough overview of the 3D view. Then the word goes back to Frank.
We come to the final part. So a little bit more about the views. There is one thing which I was myself always a little bit unhappy about. If you do modeling a detector and you have a pixelated result, then to get an interpolation, you need first to change the interpolation rule in the manipulations and then do the interpolation. The reason for that I will show very soon, but anyway, there was, of course, a way to change that. And now we have here an additional feature to do a real value smoothing. In addition to interpolation, here it's real value data. So there is nothing to be interpolated here in this way. Or this data has no interpolation included because it is set to pixelated interpolation. So we have just these two options. You can smooth that. I show you why we did that. If you have this result, and here you see now it's pixelated, this is complex data in a detector. That's enough to see, but there are phase values maybe behind it. You can also switch off the phase values, of course, in the detector, but maybe you didn't do. If you now interpolate with a cubic interpolation already from the beginning on, then you get this result. Because I must say, I put a random phase on it, a random phase. A random phase on it, if you interpolate, gives a speckled pattern. It means the phase information, because it's completely undersampled here, that's drastically undersampled. If you do an interpolation, you don't get the pixel away, but you get this result. Whereas if you do just the smoothing of this real part, then you get this result. So that's the reason why we have done it. So you have now more options. If you like to interpolate values, it's more a physics operation on the complex data. If you just like to smooth the view you have, you can use real valued smoothing. That's a small thing again, but important in the daily use. Then finally, we have added a polar diagram for 1D views. So if you have any kind of detector giving an angle-dependent detector signal, whatever it is, then you can just switch to polar diagram and get it for polar diagrams. We finally did it because for the radiometry and photometry data, of course, this is quite helpful to have. Then we have a new concept, which is graphics add-ons, which is a very, very essential new concept, because besides the data you come from the physical modeling, you also like to see maybe some kind of additional information. As I mentioned, for example, the region of a grating, for example. But we are using it now for doing the following. Now, with the new universal detector and this data fuse, the polarization ellipses we already have shown in very early versions of VirtualLab, but in an old technology we don't use anymore. So now we have also added here to the new concept, to the new version, we have now added these ellipses, polarization. We can now easily configure it, see it with this additional information we can add to a data view. That means all the data views can be overlaid by geometric figures. And here are the ellipses of the polarization. They can be fully configured very nicely. Or another example, you have done a modeling with a general profile, and you have done it with all diffraction included. And then you have done another simulation with a general profile or with a wave profile, which just gives you here nice coma picture in ray optics, and you like to compare them directly, then you can just overlay them, because that is the geometric information, this is another information, so you can get them together. That's quite nicely to discuss, for example, diffraction limited spots, etc., etc. So you can directly get the comparison of the results in different modeling situations. And then I mentioned we have detectors, for example, for lateral extent calculation, and this can also be, the result can be illustrated in the figure, so you see where the resulting size is there. You can just add it, and the detectors can optionally add this information to your figure to see it. So that means this graphics add-ons is a new tool which we started to use in comparison, also in combination with regions, by the way. So that's a region we can also add to everywhere, like the one I mentioned before for the gratings. Anyway, that is here another example where we improved the fuse for by using our new graphic add-ons and technology. Here you see now that in the light guide toolbox, when you consider the uniformity of your different channels in your iBox, now that can be illustrated directly by color encoding here in a very, very fast way. We also use our new graphic tools and techniques to have a more interactive interaction with the grating regions in the light guide toolbox. So we add some kind of new tools to add that. And now at the very end, we stop with this. Christian will show a little bit more, some further demonstrations of the data arrays, and that is also then the finishing of our webinar here. So Christian, it's your final turn.
Okay, thank you, Frank. So let's go back to VirtualLab. Okay, what Frank already introduced is importance of data arrays in VirtualLab. And before I go to some specific demonstrations, I first like to give you an overview which kind of data arrays are available in VirtualLab. So typically, a data array is a collection of data points on, let's say, coordinates. And each data array can, for example, have different subsets, which means on the same coordinates, I plot different values. In general, we differ between 3 different kinds of data arrays. I prepared for each kind of data array, I prepared a sample file. So I have here a one-dimensional data array, which where the information of the coordinate is simply one-dimensional. Maybe another important sentence to the coordinates and also to the values. So the coordinates are not restricted to be some space coordinates, so X or Y or something like this. This can be anything. So in my example case or in example file for 1D data array, for example, it's distribution which is given over an angle alpha in radian. For example, the 2D view and also the griddless data array then are given over XY in millimeters, but in general we are completely free here. So let's have a specific look on all the view settings or on some selected view settings from data array type to data array type. Let's start with the one-dimensional data array. The one-dimensional data array I prepared here, it's a spectral radiant intensity, which was calculated by one of our cool detector add-ons, contains, for example, 3 subsets, as I said. So I have one distribution, one set of coordinates, and I have 3 different distributions over the same set of coordinates. And I can easily navigate through them by clicking here through the corresponding button and changing the index of the field. This is one very nice feature. Then, of course, I can also scale the data. As you see, if you check the y-axis here, they are, for example, all differently scaled. And it's quite easy by clicking on the equalize scaling button, which is also a tooltip for the assistant, to synchronize the scaling of this stuff, which can be quite important for presentations and such things. And if you change now the subset index and go step by step through the subsets of the data array, you see that they are now scaled in the same way. Okay, another very important tool or tool collection which is available for all kinds of data arrays are the selection tools. For 1D data arrays, this means we have here this marker selection where you can have where you can select the region you like to investigate. For example, if you like to measure something, then you make here simply with the mouse drag and drop, and then you get here in the property browser, for example, you get the extension of the area you selected. So in this case, it is now 0.6 rad, for example. And what is also very nice is the point selection tool. If you click here, then you see here the value of the current data set. And also in the value at the X coordinate, you see also the values of all the other subsets which are given at the selected position. Okay, let's put the selection markers away. I'd like to show you something which is quite new and also a quite helpful feature. If you go with a mouse over a subset and you press the Shift key, in the new version now you get directly the information of the value where your mouse is located, so the value of the function. Okay, for data arrays, because for the one-dimensional data arrays, because my prepared data has several subsets, we have another very nice option, which is a multi-graph mode. You can activate it and go back, please, to automatic scaling. Then you see all the graphs, all the subset information in one display. This view can be also quite nice customized, so you can easily change the color of each curve, change also some symbols of this curve, and so on. But let's go to another very nice feature Frank already mentioned. So I turn off the multi-graph option, and I turn on the show polar diagram option for the 1D data array, which is only available if the data array is given as an angle distribution. And if I activate it, then I get this nice polar diagram. So it's the same information as before, but now not plotted in the Cartesian coordinate system, but in such a polar diagram. And also for this, we have the same view tools. So for example, I can also activate here the multi-graph option. I can also use the marker tools I used before with a range and with a specific point selection. So everything is quite sound in this way, and as Frank said, we are developing this step by step further, and this will gain much more powerful features in the future. There I'm quite sure. Okay, now let's go to the two-dimensional data array. Therefore, I prepared here a two-dimensional data set in XY as an XY distribution. It's complex valued, so I have such an amplitude, and I have also a phase, which is in this case a random phase. We have some quite nice features, but as you might already get, this discussion is also worth an own webinar. So let's concentrate on the new features, which is this interpolated view, what Frank mentioned also in his presentation. So in this case, for example, now our data of the amplitude is shown with a pixelated interpolation or with a pixelated view, and you can easily change here, for example, to this new feature, which is the real valued smoothing view, and then the shown quantity is smoothly interpolated. And in this example, this is quite a difference because, as I said, the phase here in this example is random, completely random. And if I turn on the interpolated view, complex interpolation will be done, and then you see such crazy interpolation artifacts. And this is, of course, not always what you like to see, because the phase is quite often not sampled well in such a data array. So it's very nice that we have this real valued smoothing view now. Of course, you can for two-dimensional data arrays and also for griddless data arrays, we have also the option to change the color lookup tables. We can also customize the color lookup tables. We have quite a set of available color lookup tables which are predefined. So it is quite nice to prepare your data for presentation. Okay, the last kind of data array I like to show also quite briefly. This is a griddless data array. In the griddless data array, we have a list of coordinates, and per coordinate we have one value or a set of values. Typically, we have this griddless information also together in combination with some mesh information, which means we know the neighborhood of these points. Therefore, for example, we can activate the show triangle option. And then we get a continuous distribution, which is simply an interpolation which we do in the view. And for visualization of the triangles, there's also an option available in the property browser, which is given here, shown triangles border, which we can nicely activate. And then we see directly the mesh, which is behind this griddless coordinate set given. Okay. The last thing I like to show, I think it's already quite late, is what is from the example we discussed at the beginning when we spoke about the modeling profiles. Maybe you remember this result of the ray result profile and this result of the general profile. And with the graphic add-ons, it's now quite easy to combine them. So I can simply select the equidistant 2D data array and go to the manipulation button and say here, I like to add a point cloud. Then I select the point cloud. For example, here it's the 106. And now the information of this dot diagram is added to the graph. And I can also nicely customize a view of it. So for example, let's change the color by putting it to red or something like this and making the dot a little bit larger. And then you see nicely how the information which is evaluated by the ray result profile can be combined with the PSF calculation we did in the first example. So I think the final word goes back to Frank. And then we are nearly at the end of our webinar.
So yeah, indeed, at the end of the presentation, also we think that gives a quite nice overview about what we did in the context of higher speed, easier use, more physics, deeper transparency, and better control. The concept of a very clear transparency of what we are doing is very, very important for us, and to give the user a good balance between full control and a lot of support by automatic algorithms to do decisions by the software itself. The physics, of course, we didn't discuss too much here in this presentation. This is, of course, topic of the Wednesday webinars, and detectors, some more details about that than on the Thursday webinars. So that's from me enough. Olga, I would say you can now finalize the webinar.